Following video is not made for kids. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello to my subscribers, this is the TFangi coming to you with my latest Transformers review. And I'm going to start off this review on somewhat of a sour note by reiterating something that unfortunately exists in this world. And it is a metaphor that goes by this, that all good things must come to an end. I try not to use that metaphor in my life for personal reasons, but unfortunately, one thing that has come to an end as of this video's recording is what, for me personally, is one of the greatest trilogies in the Transformers franchise, the War for Cybertron Trilogy. And the last figure to be released in the Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy is what this review is going to focus on, which is this figure right here. This is the Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy Kingdom Core Class Hot Rod figure. So, Hot Rod has gotten a lot of flack due to his transformation being nothing like his G1 figure, and unlike the other Core Class Transformers, such as Optimus Prime and Starscream, who were released in the Kingdom line, and even Megatron, even though he has a tank for his vehicle mode, they all have transformations that are somewhat reminiscent of their G1 versions, but Hot Rod, not so much. The only part of Hot Rod whose transformation is similar is the fact that the headlights of his vehicle mode end up becoming the shoulders of his robot mode. But other than that, pretty much everything about Hot Rod is a new type of transformation. He has a fake chest in robot mode. It's not the actual hood of his car. The hood itself actually ends up along with the windshield folding up into the back of his robot mode legs. The War for Cybertron, for many Transformers fans and collectors, myself included, Hot Rod is the final figure in the War for Cybertron trilogy to be released, and because Hot Rod is not the greatest Transformers figure by any means, he's not even the greatest core class figure. I've seen some fans and collectors say that Hot Rod is their least favorite core class figure from the entire core class size of the Kingdom line, and even in the recently released Legacy line. So, the War for Cybertron trilogy has ended on somewhat of a sour note instead of ending on a grand finale, which was what some fans and collectors have voiced their opinions about wanting due to Core Class Hot Rod being the final officially released Transformers Kingdom figure. I got Hot Rod courtesy of Amazon about 2 months ago, in March. And for me personally, the first Transformers figure that I got in the War for Cybertron trilogy was the deluxe class figure of Transformers Siege Autobot Cog, and I got Cog also courtesy of Amazon. But what Amazon did is they managed to get a hold of the deluxe class figures from the first wave of the Siege line back in November of 2018 on Black Friday, so that the first wave of Siege figures, at least the deluxe class sized figures, fans and collectors could get them on Black Friday, and if people wanted to wait until Christmas to give them as presents to people who collect Transformers figures, then Amazon allowed people the chance to do so. And since I got Hot Rod back in March, for me personally, the War for Cybertron trilogy, where I live in my corner of the United States, it lasted 3 years and 3 months, so 3.25 years, from November of 2018 to March of 2022, from the very first War for Cybertron trilogy figure that I got, which was Siege Cog, to the last figure, which was Kingdom Core Class Hot Rod. And considering how many more fantastic Transformers figures were released in that 3.25 time frame, the War for Cybertron trilogy did not really end in the grand scheme of things. So some Transformers fans and collectors have been a little let down by that, but there is some hope, because Core Class Hot Rod, along with the Kingdom Voyager Class Blaster, whose box I'm pointing at right there, who I already reviewed, Hot Rod and Blaster, in addition to being released in the final wave of the Kingdom line, they have also been released in Wave 1 of the Legacy line, and they're the two Transformers figures that have unofficially tied the Legacy line to Kingdom and the War for Cybertron trilogy, and it's rumored that Hot Rod and also Blaster, all along they were originally intended for release in Wave 1 of the Legacy line, but Hasbro and Takara decided to bump up and release a few copies about, I want to say, thanks to supply lines and supply chains getting messed up on the global market, they ended up being released just 1 month before the legacy releases of them were released. So, not too much earlier for most fans and collectors, but it is nice that Hot Rod and Blaster were released in both the Kingdom and Legacy line, and it's given fans hope that Legacy that it might be serve as a sequel series to Kingdom and the War for Cybertron Trilogy. Time will tell if that's what Takara Tomy and Hasbro want to do and make Legacy the first part of a sequel trilogy to the War for Cybertron Trilogy. A lot of Transformers fans and collectors have pointed out that the design aesthetics of the figures released in the Legacy line are somewhat similar to the Kingdom line, and they aren't too far of a departure from the War for Cybertron Trilogy figures, and Hot Rod and Blaster are the two figures that have linked the Legacy line and the Kingdom line and the War for Cybertron Trilogy and Legacy together. Now, evidence that Hot Rod was originally going to be released only in the Legacy line can be seen right here on the artwork on Kingdom Hot Rod's box. Hot Rod is not holding the sword that he comes with here on his artwork. He is actually holding the sword that you make when you combine the weapons that come with Hot Rod and also the two core class figures in the Legacy line of Iguanus and Skywarp. So yes, that is evidence, for me personally, that is evidence right there, Kingdom Hot Rod's artwork, in which he's holding the sword made from the combined weapons of both him, along with Iguanus and Skywarp, that he was originally going to be a Legacy figure all along from the start. Alright, so this was a quote-unquote early release here in the Kingdom line. So you can judge what you want. You can come to your own conclusions about the artwork about that, but that is what I personally believe. So here in the box, Hot Rod, he's just like all the other core class figures in the Kingdom line. You got him packaged in his robot mode. There's his weapon of the sword. Right there, there's his artwork. His name is Autobot Hot Rod. Hasbro couldn't get a registered trademark on his name without putting the word Autobot in front of it. It's no big deal to me, but to some hardcore G1 fans it might be. Coming around here to the back of the box, you've got the product photos of Hot Rod in his robot mode and his vehicle mode. He transforms back and forth between both modes in 8 steps. There's actually 2 places you can store Hot Rod's sword, and it shows here on the box. You can either plug the sword on top of his racing spoiler, or as you can see, there's a 3mm hole on the front of the spoiler, and you can have the sword placed in front of the spoiler and have it level with the spoiler and make Hot Rod slightly more streamlined than he would having the sword just perched on top of his racing spoiler. But other than those 2 spots on the racing spoiler, there really isn't any other place to store Hot Rod's sword in his vehicle mode. One thing that irks me a little bit is that the blade of Hot Rod's sword, it's this very bright powder, almost like cake frosting powder blue shade instead of the more solid blue pictured here on the back of the box. So it's actually almost the same as Hot Rod's windshield rather than being a darker shade of blue. So that's just a minor nitpick that I have. So without further delay, it's time to get Hot Rod out of his box and take a close look at him in his robot mode. Alright, so here is Hot Rod out of his box and transformed into his robot mode. So a thought came to my mind the other day, with everyone not calling Hot Rod the greatest Transformers figure and him being found in a wider release in the Legacy line, I decided when I found it at my local Target store the other day to get the Legacy version of Hot Rod. So here is Legacy Hot Rod's packaging compared to the Kingdom line. The Kingdom line uses the old style of packaging where you have a plastic bubble in front of a card back. Here on the new Legacy figures, it's all cardboard. It's all cardboard packaging. The plastic window's gone. In fact, there isn't even a plastic window here. It's an open window. I did a video discussing my hatred of open window packaging a few weeks ago. So, somewhat ironically, the artwork on Kingdom Hot Rod's box shows Hot Rod in his robot mode, while the artwork on the Legacy box shows him in his vehicle mode. So that's interesting to see that Hot Rod got 2 types of artwork on his 2 boxes. I don't know if Blaster has that honor of having 2 different styles of artwork on his box, or if it's the same one used on both the Kingdom and Legacy lines. The product photos on the back of the box of the 2 boxes are the same, but the robot mode photo has been mirrored on the Legacy packaging compared to the Kingdom one, so that is interesting to see that there are differences in packaging between the Legacy and Kingdom versions of Hot Rod. But the boxes are the only difference between the two figures themselves. The actual Hot Rod figure itself, the Legacy version and the Kingdom version are virtually identical. They are the exact same figure, same exact paint job everywhere. Pretty much the only difference that you might notice on the Legacy version of Hot Rod compared to the Kingdom version, and I noticed this on every copy of Hot Rod that my local Target store had of the Legacy Hot Rod figure, because of the open window packaging, you might see some paint scraping on Hot Rod's chest. One thing to note about Hot Rod is that all the parts of him that are the yellowish orange here, such as his robot mode chest and his racing spoiler, which turns into a pair of wings that sit on his back, all the orange and yellow parts on core class Hot Rod, it's all paint. And the only colored plastic that's used on Hot Rod is red plastic, the one exception being the tires of his vehicle mode being cast in black plastic. But all the other paint layouts on Hot Rod, his gray face, the blue on his eyes, the blue on his sword, his orange knee pads, the silvery blue of his windshield, the orange and yellow flames on his vehicle mode hood, even the exhaust pipes, that's all paint. It's all paint, so if you were to take away all the paint on Hot Rod, he would be completely red, with the only color difference to break up the red being the black tires. So Hasbro and Takara did save on using painting over red plastic with the yellowish orange paint instead of actually casting it that color. But let's get on to the nitty gritty and tear apart why Hot Rod is the worst core class figure ever. So for starters, and you can't really see it in robot mode when he's transformed completely, but if you detach his racing spoiler, this is the main gripe I have with core class Hot Rod ever since the product photos were shown. For whatever reason, Hasbro and Takara decided to carve out the inside of Hot Rod's head. So Hot Rod is brainless. Aimless, you can make that joke about core class Hot Rod. His head is completely hollowed out. Why in the world Hasbro and Takara did that and thought it was a great idea to remove all the plastic inside Hot Rod's head is beyond me. There's a couple of other hollowed out plastic bits, but they aren't as prominent as the one that you can see on the back of his head. He does have the inside of his legs are hollowed out, but that's primarily due to how his knee joints transform into his vehicle mode. The arms, they're a little thinned out on the upper arm, but again, that's due to clearance space of how he transforms. So the most hollowed out part of Hot Rod is his backpack and his robot mode head, so that is a huge disappointment to see that. His sword, it's a standard sword. It is made out of solid plastic, so be careful. If you accidentally poke yourself too hard with this thing, you could hurt yourself, or if you're too rough, the sword could snap off, or even worst case scenario, a combination of both. It snaps off after you accidentally jab it with yourself. So yeah, be careful with Hot Rod's sword. It is not the safest weapon that a core class figure has come with. So for articulation, technically Hot Rod does have ball jointed shoulders, but because of how the socket that the ball joint rests in is shaped, you can't really move Hot Rod's arms out to the side. And on my copy of Hot Rod, the ball joints are a little stiff if fresh out of the packaging, but at least he has ball jointed elbows, so the lower arms can move inward and outward, and they can dangle, and then you can rotate up and down slightly, but there's no bicep swivel due to how he transforms. Also, I showed it off a moment ago. Hot Rod's head is a part of his torso, so there is no neck articulation on him at all. No waist articulation, also due to how the racing spoiler transforms. He does have ball jointed hips, but again, because the arms can't really go out to the side, you need to have Hot Rod pointing his arms forward to have the clearance space to get his legs folded out to the sides. They can go backwards that far, they can go forward that far. No thigh swivel, but he does have ball-jointed knees, so his legs can rotate inward and outward. They can bend into the knee joint this much. They have the potential to bend farther, but again, the kibble on the back of his legs gets in the way, and the knees and the hips are the only articulation Hot Rod has in his legs. So let's look at the back here. Yeah, the windshield and the hood of Hot Rod's vehicle mode just sits on the back of his shins. You could make an argument that Hot Rod has oversized calf muscles on the backs of his legs, but that joke can only get you so far before you realize that, yeah, that's just a awkward design to give a Transformers figure, even for the core class size. Alright, so, in my final word, yeah, Hot Rod, he currently holds the title of being my least favorite core class figure to be released so far. On that note, oh, do I regret getting not one but two copies of Hot Rod, one to keep in the box and one to take out of the box? No, I do not, because here's the thing. Even though this is arguably the worst core class Transformers figure to be released since the core class size was introduced in Wave 1 of the Kingdom line over a year ago, if Hot Rod is the worst figure that Hasbro and Takara Tomy can release in this size, then I think it's evidence that Hasbro and Takara Tomy do believe that they can produce more outstanding Transformers figures in this size class. And this actually isn't the worst Hot Rod figure that's ever been released. There are a handful of Hot Rod figures I've seen in the past that are worse than the core class Hot Rod figure, but all in all, I do agree with what most Transformers fans and collectors have. One problem that my copy of Hot Rod has out of the box is that the ball joints in his legs are a little loose, and then these sections right here, which are supposed to lock in place, there's no clips or anything to hold him in place, so this transformation joint in Hot Rod's knee, it wants his lower leg to swing out to the side when he's in robot mode. Pretty much the only thing on Hot Rod that does feel sort of tight, in addition to the shoulder joints, is when you plug his racing spoiler into his back. It does stay pegged in fairly well, but again, the racing spoiler itself is entirely cast in red plastic and it's been painted over yellow, so if you transform Hot Rod back and forth, or then you disconnect and reconnect the racing spoiler from his back too many times, there is a chance that you could see some paint scraping around the 3mm peg that allows you to plug it into place. So for a quick size comparison, here is Core Class Hot Rod next to Siege Cog. So these are the two Transformers figures for me personally that serve as the bookends for the War for Cybertron Trilogy figure. Cog is the figure that I started the War for Cybertron Trilogy with, and Hot Rod is the figure that I ended the War for Cybertron Trilogy with. Most fans and collectors did get Hot Rod, even the Kingdom version. They got it last after Blaster and Slimer and Pipes, who were the other figures in the fifth and final wave of the Kingdom line. One of the criticisms that Hot Rod has received is that, again, as I showed in his artwork here on the Kingdom box, Hot Rod, he has a sword where the bottom half of the sword, the hilt, was broken up into two further parts, which were sold with Iguanus and Skywarp, and it's part of a gimmick Hasbro and Takara Tomy are going to do with the core class figures from each wave of the Legacy line, is that the weapons they all come with combine into one larger weapon, and for the Wave 1 Legacy figures, the combined weapons that you get with Hot Rod, Iguanus, and core class Skywarp, it's a giant sword that officially Hot Rod is supposed to wield, so Hot Rod has been given some criticism by fans and collectors for being the figure responsible for Skywarp and Iguanus not coming with proper weapons of their own. It is a little tragic and no pun intended by the word little, that Core Class Hot Rod has also received that additional criticism by fans and collectors wanting Iguanus and Skywarp to come with weapons similar to what their G1 figures and for Skywarp, other more recently released figures have come packaged with. So the video's already gone on a lot longer than I intended it to, but I just wanted to share that I do not like Core Class Hot Rod as much as other Transformers figures in the Kingdom line, or even in the first wave of the Legacy line. Alright, so let's hurry up and get Hot Rod transformed into his alt mode, wrap up the review, and give a final thoughts on this Transformers figure. Alright, and so here is Hot Rod in his vehicle mode, and man, what a pain that was to transform. So to put it in perspective, to transform Hot Rod properly, you have to flip the racing spoiler down 180 degrees around, but you have to have the wheels and the windshield spread out to the side, yet at the same time the final step in the transformation is to have the two halves of the windshield come down, clip into place, and sit here comfortably to form the top front middle section of Hot Rod's vehicle mode. Yet at the same time, you can't just put the two halves back in, because the racing spoiler has a pair of clips that plug into the back of Hot Rod's legs to secure that area in place. And even when everything lines up properly, the windshield halves don't sit flush with the rest of the vehicle mode, and it's kind of hard to tell, but if you look through there is the tiniest gap that is visible. And of course, with the sword, you've got two spots to put it on. You can either put it directly on top of the racing spoiler and make it look as though Hot Rod is ready to stab any low-flying Decepticons, or if you want to give Hot Rod a slightly more streamlined look, as I said earlier in the review, you can put the sword here on the front of the racing spoiler and have it sticking right there. There is unfortunately no pegs or holes to put the sword in here underneath Hot Rod's vehicle mode, and even if you did, unfortunately, there is no clearance space with the wheels. And out of all the core class figures that I own, Hot Rod has been proven to be the most difficult to transform. So my opinion has not changed. He still holds the title of being the worst core class Transformers figure that's been released in both the Kingdom and Legacy lines so far. And I actually hope Hot Rod holds on to that title, because I'd hate to see Hasbro and Takara Tomy release a core class figure that fans and collectors find even worse than Hot Rod. So here's another minor nitpick that fans and collectors have with core class Hot Rod. The only Autobot logo he has is the one on his robot mode chest, so he doesn't have an Autobot logo on the hood of his vehicle mode. Oh, so that is a disappointment right there. And because the wheels all clip into place, they do roll sort of okay, but not really that great, due to how small and thin they are. Alright, so for a quick size comparison, because we brought him out earlier, here is Core Class Hot Rod next to Siege Cog. So again, for me personally, these are the two Transformers figures that are the bookends of the War vs. Cybertron Trilogy in my collection. I started off with Cog, and I ended with Core Class Hot Rod. So again, unfortunately, the War vs. Cybertron Trilogy and also the Kingdom line, it did not end on a grand finale. It ended on somewhat of a sour note, with Core Class Hot Rod being the final figure released. And the only silver lining that fans and collectors have had with Core Class Hot Rod is the fact that he, along with Voyager Class Blaster, have been released in both the Kingdom and Legacy lines. So some fans have hope that Legacy will be a sequel series to the War vs. Cybertron trilogy and not entirely be its own new storyline for the Transformers. Time will tell, because the Legacy line is going to be given an animated cartoon series on Netflix. So we'll see if it will be a more mature storyline similar to what the War vs. Cybertron Trilogy cartoon series, what Netflix tried to do with them and make it more mature, or if it will be similar to the cartoons that that have aired on television in the past, which appeal to younger audiences. So this has been my review of the Transformers Kingdom / Legacy Core Class Hot Rod. I'm still undecided if I'm going to change which thumbnail I'm going to use on the video. If I'm going to use the current one I've planned on using, which is a photo of just Kingdom Hot Rod, or if I'm going to do a photo of both it and the Legacy figure standing side by side. Alright, so yes, this has been Core Class Hot Rod, which is a dud, unfortunately. But thank you guys all so much for watching, and stay tuned for my other upcoming reviews. And until next time, you guys, stay safe, stay healthy, transform and roll out. Goodbye, everyone.